other crazy things like that by Business Insider. Much more grandiose than that, I'm sure. And then we've got Dave McClure in August, and we've got Ann, the partner at Floodgate, who invested in Twitter and Foursquare and lots of other companies, coming in July. So yeah, that's Startup Grind. StartupGrind.com will be, we blog about startups and we talk a lot about these events, so get any of the information about the events there. Denise, where's Denise? Denise is right here. So let's give Denise a big round of applause from Ring Central. Come on up, Denise.
Thank you, Derek. I'm Denise Terry. I head PR and marketing communications for Ring Central. We're sponsoring tonight's event. I'm very happy to have Startup Grind as actually a happy customer. You guys happy?
Yeah, very happy.
Okay. So tonight we're giving away something special. We are actually a cloud-based phone system. We got started here in the Valley in San Mateo by two Russian engineers in their backyard, literally. We've now grown to several hundred employees. We have offices worldwide in Asia and Europe. And we basically provide small businesses, businesses of any size really, with a cloud-based phone system. So everything you need in a business phone system, but without any hardware to install. So tonight we're giving away 1 year free of Ring Central Office, which includes unlimited voice over IP minutes, which means you can make phone calls from really your mobile phone or your desk phone or your soft phone, unlimited with no money charged. So all you need to do is tweet at us. So we're at Ring Central with the hashtag StartupGrind. Right? Yep. Send us a cool tweet, and we will choose you for a year free of Ring Central with one user. So that's like a $600 value. So. Thank you.
Thank you. That's worth a round of applause. Yeah, you got a question, Ethan?
Extra year? Sure. Why not?
Okay. We'll go for it. Okay, great. I want to just thank a couple people, and then we're gonna start. I want to thank John on the camera, our great cameraman. Please hire him. He's amazing. Todd on the live blog over here, blogging about startupgrind.com and just being generally weird over there. Jared from Zoomio. Where you at, Jared? Jared. It helps us out a lot and is a really talented designer. Francisco, where's Francisco? Over here, he's our community manager, and please meet him. Really, really talented young guy. McKay Danes, wherever McKay is in the back, also. So when we bring in first time grinders here, anybody? Let's see it. Okay. So if you've been here before, you've seen this. We like to bring people in properly. We like to treat them a little bit like a rock star. Like we got Angelina Jolie or something just walked in the door. So. Whoa, a lot of haters out there tonight. A lot of haters. That doesn't bode well. What? Buster Posey. Okay, we're in a tech event, dude. There's no sports fans here. Are there? Okay, all right. I can be wrong once every month. So let's stand. Let's give this a try. Stand up, cheer. Let's see this right now. Right here. Okay. That sucked. This was really bad. No, I'm just kidding. It wasn't that bad. So let me introduce Adam Lashinsky. Adam, we are so fortunate to have him here tonight. And Adam is a senior editor of Fortune. He's the author of Inside Apple. He's written about basically every major company here in the Valley, from HP to Oracle to Twitter to obviously Apple, Google. He has previously to Fortune, he was at the San Jose Mercury News in the Street. And it's a pleasure to have him here tonight. Let's give him a big Startup Grind welcome. Adam Lashinsky, here we go. Welcome.
Thank you.
I don't have to tell you to. I know you're good at speaking in a mic, so we will. Thanks. Please speak in if you can. Welcome to the Startup Grind, all the way from San Francisco.
All the way from Potrero Hill.
Okay. Wow. Well, to get started, we always like to just kind of find out a little bit about our speakers. So I know you hail from Chicago. Tell us a little bit about growing up in Chicago, and tell us a little bit about your family and your parents and your sisters.
Okay, I was born and raised in a suburb of Chicago called Skokie. It's most famous for where the American Nazi Party tried marching in 1978 or 79. I'm forgetting now. To
Sure, know
try
it
to
well.
piss off all the retired Jews who were concentration camp survivors, which was really nice of them. And they didn't end up marching in Skokie. They only marched in the movie in the Blues Brothers instead. I didn't hear the whole thing there, but that's okay. Let's see. You asked me about my parents. My father is from Omaha, Nebraska, and is a retired corporate economist. He worked for a steel company for almost 30 years. When I was a little boy and I would visit him at his office in the Loop in Chicago, people would look at me strangely and say, "Are you going to be an economist too someday?" And because they thought he was strange as the economist at a company. My mother, who passed away 5 years ago, right after my 5-year-old daughter was born, raised 3 children. I have a sister in London and another sister in New York. All right.
Better? Too low?
How's that?
Great. Thanks. Okay, so you didn't become an economist, but you went to school in Illinois. And was your plan basically from the beginning? Was it to become a journalist? What was your thought? What did you want to be when you grew up?
No, it wasn't my plan. I was a political science and then history major, and was headed toward going to law school. I met a lot of miserable law students and decided that I didn't really want to be a law student or a lawyer. And I got really lucky toward the end of college. The summer before my senior year in college, I was dating a girl who worked for the Daily Illini, the very fine student newspaper at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. And I contributed some political columns from Washington, where I was doing a summer internship with a congressional caucus, and I really liked seeing my name in the newspaper. And I talked my way into a regular column the following semester.
Awesome.
Really enjoyed that. Thought that I wanted to be William Safire at the New York Times, if anybody remembers who he was. And it dawned on me that the New York Times would not be giving me a column the following year when I graduated from college. So spring term, I became a reporter for the paper, and I would take any assignment that the editors would give me. I was older than the editors, and so I could do what I wanted.
You could get around.
And I fell in love. I found my calling as a journalist.
What were you writing about initially? I mean, was it? Tell us, what were some of your big? What were the stories that had the most page views back then?
Yeah, thank you for pointing out my age, since there weren't page views at the time, obviously.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So my column was about politics, both campus politics, national politics, international politics. My news coverage, because I was hungry for bylines. That's the way journalists think. You want more bylines, more clips to show future employers. I covered a protest at the local dry cleaner because the animal rights activists were upset that they were storing fur coats. I covered telephone company rate commission hearings. I covered a very controversial topic, which was an effort by the federal government to close a local Air Force base. I went to Washington to cover that, and also a women's march for equality on Capitol Hill.
Wow.
I took everything I could get.
Wow. And did you have a love for tech? Did you have a love for, was that something that materialized later, or was that something, did you guys grow up with a computer in the home, or?
No, I'm not to this day, I'm not a techie per se. I took a handful of business classes in college because my father it really insisted that I do. So I took a couple econ classes, an accounting class, a finance class. So I graduated with the lingo of business, being comfortable with the lingo of business. I went to Washington because I was interested in politics, but the first job I got was in business journalism, and so I just became a business journalist, business generalist over the first 10 or so years of my career. I did cover technology in Chicago, which when I applied for a job at the San Jose Mercury News, they said, "But you cover technology in Chicago. What is that good for?" Not much, but I talked my way into the job at the San Jose Mercury News, and I always billed myself as a business journalist covering the technology industry, not a technology journalist covering the technology industry. that turned out to be really useful when I started this Tech Stocks column at the Mercury News in '97, because really all the emphasis had been on technology. And I showed up in the offices of analysts, investment bankers, chief financial officers, who were delighted to see somebody from the Mercury News who gave a shit about finance.
Yeah.
Because everybody else wanted to talk about all these other important topics that weren't my topic.
And I mean, was that, so that was a really fresh take. I mean, we think that was '97. You said that you got to the San Jose Mercury
as the first bubble was inflating. Yeah. And the year that Steve Jobs came back to Apple.
And you talk about before you got to the Mercury, you spent time in Tokyo. You said earlier you spent time in Washington, D.C. Tell us a little bit about what you were doing there and what your experience was there.
In Tokyo?
Yeah.
I was a recipient of a fellowship from the Henry Luce Scholars Program, which sends a group of young Americans, young being under the age of 30, but college graduates, to Asia for one academic year, even though it's not an academic fellowship. It's a work fellowship. And the only requirement other than the age is that you not have any significant Asia experience before winning. And they wanted to send each year a group of, it's still ongoing, a group of promising, by their definition, young Americans to experience Asia. It started 30 years ago on the assumption that not enough Americans knew enough about Asia. So they found me a position at the Nikkei Weekly, which is the English language weekly edition of the Nihon Keizai Shimbun, which is Japan's Wall Street Journal. I hung out with a bunch of Japanese journalists and wrote some stories as best I could, since I didn't speak Japanese very well, and traveled around.
You wrote in Japanese, or they translated them? Did you write in Japanese?
No, it was an English language weekly, so I wrote in English, and traveled all over Japan, traveled all over Asia, drank a lot of beer and ate a lot of noodles.
Awesome. Let's talk a little bit about journalism, and clearly it's something as you've said, you kind of almost fell into it. But what about your profession, and what about being a journalist do you really love? Tell us a little, and also tell us what makes for a great writer. Is that something that you can, that you can kind of check boxes on? Is it different all across the board?
So if you ask any professional journalist if they identify as a writer or as a reporter, most will be able to answer that question one way or the other. They'll either say, so for the first 15 or so years of my career, I would have told you I was a reporter. What I loved was going out, meeting people, talking to them, hearing their stories, synthesizing their stories, networking, putting people together, piecing together the story, and so on. And I was a news guy for the beginning of my career. When I got to Fortune values writers, people who can craft stories. And I was already in my 30s at that point. And I worked really hard at becoming a writer. I've come to appreciate the value of writing long-form narrative stories. It did not come naturally to me. I'm really proud of my writing today, but it's something that I worked at the way, you hear even gifted professional golfers work for hours at their swing. I worked really hard at my style as a writer. You asked me what I love about being a journalist. It's really the reporting that I love. And I no 2 days are the same for me. I don't spend all day, any day in the office. Some days I'm in the office, most days I'm not. I love being out talking to people.
How have the cycles changed in the last 20 years? From, it's easy for us to recognize what's happening today, this 24-hour news cycle, and with tech, it's like even in the 3 years that since I left my corporate job at EA, it has sped up dramatically since then. Tell us what, looking back 15 years, how has technology and how it's been reported, how has it morphed and changed?
So I'm not the best one to ask, and here's why. So when I worked at TheStreet.com, which was focused on the stock market, I tended not to watch CNBC.
Yeah.
I didn't like CNBC. I don't object to CNBC per se, but I didn't want to watch CNBC because I found that it polluted my thinking, and I didn't need all that noise. If I had all that noise, how was I going to do my own thing and come up with my own ideas? So similarly today, I'm not a habitual reader of the tech blogs, for example. Of course I see things, but it's not my destination, because I feel I read a lot of things.
Yeah.
What I read happens to be fairly traditional, but I don't feel like I need to know every little thing, because if I know every little thing, it's going to be crowding out my own ability to analyze and synthesize and come up with the really important things.
Yeah.
So to me, yes, I understand that things have sped up, but I think it's I think there's a I think it's something of a pendulum. I think the pendulum swings, and I think it will continue to swing. Before there were blogs, there were newsletter writers.
Sure.
Some crackpot, everything from some crackpot cranking out something in his basement on some conspiracy theory, up to people writing, really valuable newsletters about, say, the stock market for thousands of dollars a month, and everything in between. Blogs replaced newsletters. There's really high quality blogs. There's really low quality blogs. There's really high quality journalism, and there's crap journalism. And my point is, there always has been.
Yeah. What in terms of print media, do you think our grandkids will know what magazines are? What is your take on the evolution of the magazine?
They probably won't, because print probably isn't going to be around at some point when our grandchildren are consuming the news or consuming print information. And I personally have gone from being upset about that to what's it, the 12 stages of denial. Only I think it's a happier ending than that. I don't think information and storytelling are dying. And so we professionals get really hung up on print or digital or broadcast, and I've come to understand that I don't really care about that. I'm really confident that people are going to continue to want high quality journalism, and I'm somewhat confident or resigned to the fact that the smart people on the business side will figure out how to sell it. And they'll keep paying me to create it.
What publications do you read, do you respect outside of your own?
So as I said, I'm really traditional in my appetites. I read every morning.
The Onion.
On a good morning. I love The Onion. I'm not a regular, but they're awesome. Yeah. I no sarcasm there. But every morning I read the San Francisco Chronicle, the Wall Street Journal, and the New York Times in print. I love to then go to their websites and send out stories, whether to friends or on Twitter or on Facebook, that I read. So I like grazing, both ways, if you will. And for fun, for my own enjoyment, I read The New Yorker and Vanity Fair, and I get The Economist, which I think is phenomenal, and so on. Like I said, I'm personally very traditional in my media tastes, and I believe more than ever that I like reading newspapers. Now, if newspapers go away, I'll survive. I'll suffer through it.
Save some old ones and just.
I've saved some. Yeah, I have.
It's funny, actually, you mentioned that. I remember. Sunday morning as a kid, that was a highlight of the week, right? Was getting a newspaper, sitting down, and just kind of going through it, or I just thinking about. That was. When I was, that was 10, 15 years ago. 15,
yeah,
not 10, but 15.
Yeah, big deal around my house, absolutely, was, I can sort of, this sounds sort of corny, but I can smell the coffee and taste the bagels with lox and cream cheese and the Sunday paper and classical music playing. That was our Sunday morning routine as a family.
Yeah. So let me just make one quick announcement I forgot to make. Can I grab that from you, Erica? So we've got a couple of books that we're going to be giving away to some of the people on Twitter. So at Startup Grind and also put at Ring Central in there. We've got some books here that Adam's already signed. So take pictures, tweet out some of the things that and please tag Adam as well in there. Big thanks to Don. What happened to Don? He just went on a goose chase and got this drink. Can we just give Don a real round of applause here real quick?
Thank you, Don.
What he's doing. Oh, there you are, right there. I can't see you. Sorry. So talk to us a little bit about Inside Apple. This is a really absolutely fascinating book, and Apple has had so much press at the end of the year and then into the beginning of the year, and as I was reading it, I was just it was so valuable to me to just kind of listen to some of these lessons and go through them again. and that's really why we wanted to have you here, and we're so excited to have you. But talk to us a little bit about just the process of coming up with the idea. Where did it come from, and how did that all kind of materialize?
Sure. So, and I'll try to be concise, and you can guide me if I'm saying too little or too much on this, because this is my life's work for the past year and a half or so. So it's something that I'm passionate about and excited about. The genesis of there's a couple different genesises, if that's a word, of this book. The first is, I was never the Apple guy for Fortune. Other people were the Apple guys and gals, and for a variety of reasons, in 2008. One of my editors said to me, well, this was during one of Steve Jobs' illnesses or medical leaves. He said, well, if Steve were to not make it, who would be the next CEO of Apple? And I said, well, that's, obviously it would be Tim Cook. He said, well, why is it so obvious? I've never heard of that guy. I said, well, that's a good story if you've never heard of that guy. So I did a profile in 2008. The cover story in Fortune was called "The Genius Behind Steve." Meet the operations whiz who could be the next CEO of Apple. And I quoted people who said, and it was a widely held opinion at the time, no way is Tim Cook going to be the next CEO of Apple. Not that guy. He's so different from Steve Jobs in so many ways. So that was a really interesting story.
That's from some sources. You're saying you got both sides. You got this.
Well, I believed from focusing on this on what was going on at Apple and talking to Apple people that he absolutely was going to be the CEO. It was obvious to me at the time. You talk to people at the time, they would tell you, well, Tim's already running the company with the exception of the things that Steve does.
Sure.
And that was my first big Apple story, and that kind of made me the Apple guy. And since then, I've only, including the one that's on the newsstands right now, I've only done 3 since. One was when we made Steve Jobs CEO of the decade. I did that story. And then a year ago, I did a story in the magazine called Inside Apple. And the working title was How Apple Works. The operating idea behind the story, and this started with one of my editors as well, was, we think we know everything about Apple. We know about its products. But what do we know about how this amazing, successful, phenomenal company actually operates? Well, not much. Why? Because they won't tell us. Now, half a step back, this grew out of a meeting that Steve Jobs did with a bunch of Time Inc. editors in New York, where they got to talking, and he said, we don't have committees at Apple. We don't believe in committees, and we behave like a startup. And my editor, Andy Serwer, the editor of Fortune magazine, said, oh, really? That's interesting. Tell us more about that. And he did. He talked about it a little bit, and Andy said, we'd love to do that story. And Steve said, yeah, maybe we will, which was his way of saying no. That was his brush off. And Andy didn't forget that. And Andy said to me, that's our story. Let's do that story. That was the genesis, and that's what I spent a lot of time on, first doing that story in Fortune. And we can talk about what was in that story. There were a whole bunch of things that were well known in the community of Apple employees that had never been reported before. The DRI, the top 100, the VP and the janitor.
That's where the top 100 came out.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that.
And then very shortly after that article appeared, I sold it as a book.
Okay. And so talk to us a little bit about the process of creating the book. I mean, in terms of some of the logistics of that. Like, so you have this great success with the story. It's widely liked. It's a topic people are more interested in hearing more about. You decide, I'm going to write a book. Then what? What happens the next morning?
It almost was like that. And I'll just by way of interest, I'll take a half a step back. We did an experiment with this story. We knew it was going to be a hot story, and so we didn't put it on our website. And we also created it as an e-single.
For download or something?
At Amazon, yeah, for purchase. And I'm forgetting the exact lingo, because at Amazon there's a difference between a Kindle single and an e-single. Kindle single is an original work of art, so I think this was an e-single, and we sold it for I think 99 cents.
Okay.
And it was an interesting experiment. It was successful, but people were very frustrated that they couldn't get it for free, which we were amused by. And we were frustrated too that they were frustrated and all that. But that's not what you asked me about. My editor at my publishing house and I agreed that we needed to move quickly. we knew Walter Isaacson's book was coming out, and we didn't want to lag his book by a whole lot.
Yeah.
At the time, this was in June of 2011, Walter Isaacson's book was scheduled for March of 2012.
Wow.
People forget that. And so we hoped to beat him to market.
Yeah.
We also knew, and that I want to be clear, that was the primary reason behind the timing. Secondary reason for the timing was, we knew Steve Jobs wasn't going to live forever. We had no idea what the timetable would be, and very few people did. Right down to the point where a lot of people deluded themselves in retrospect in thinking when he resigned in August of last year that he was going to live a lot longer than 6 weeks. Anyway, but we knew it would be a good idea to move faster rather than slower. So I spent some period of last summer doing additional reporting, some period of last summer tending to Fortune Brainstorm Tech, which is the conference that I co-run at Fortune, and then some period of time on vacation, which was very stressful being on vacation on the East Coast, knowing that this was hanging over me. And then I took off the month of September last year and wrote a rough draft of the book, and I spent the next several months revising it.
And so had you done all of your research and all of your interviews primarily before that?
Well, as I said, I took work that I had. But I really kept reporting while I was writing because of the time sensitivity. I kept gathering more information, buttressing things I'd already done.
How many people did you interview?
I don't know the answer, and I have to. I guess I should. I haven't had a spare moment to sit down and count, but I need to do that. It was dozens.
Yeah. And do you know how many hours? Have you figured that out? How many hours? Hundreds? Thousands?
Well, you could do the math. You could help me. There's probably a mathematician or an engineer in the room. I mean, I spent, from about mid-July through the end of the year, I spent most 40-hour work weeks on it. And then I've taken a lot of time since the book was done going out and promoting it.
Yeah. And did you, in terms of that first draft that you had, how different, on a percentage basis, was the first draft versus the version that we've read?
About consistent with the magazine article. The essence of what you read is what I filed on the first day, but it was missing things.
Yeah.
And it was missing whole chapters, and it was missing parts of chapters, and everything in it became better. My editor, whose name is John Brody, who was an editor at Fortune magazine, is a fantastic book editor, and he's a collaborator and a friend, and he knows when he reads the book which parts he was responsible for. And so do I.
Do you have a specific when you actually sit down to write? Do you have a specific pattern that you follow in terms of either your book writing or also just your magazine writing? Do you write in the morning? Do you write with your cell phone off? Are there specific things that you do?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. First I procrastinate, and I heard a real giant in the writing field speak last week. Aaron Sorkin talked about the same thing. He said the beginning of the writing process doesn't look like writing; it looks like watching college sports on TV, and I can really relate to that. Now, I didn't have a lot of time in this book to mess around, so I got down to business pretty quickly. And what I did, I have there's a university library near where I live that has high-speed internet and a pub with food and coffee. I don't mean, I would have an occasional beer, but more of the fact that there's food and drinks to be had. And my gym is nearby. So when I wasn't going to work at Fortune, I would go to this library all day. And I would take time out to eat and work out. And otherwise, that was my way of not having the distractions of the office or my home.
Did you write in the pub or in the club or
Not
anything?
much. I mostly wrote in the library.
Okay.
And late at night.
And did you write it on a MacBook or a PC?
I wrote this book on I'm not embarrassed to tell you I wrote this book on an HP Latitude laptop.
Awesome.
You don't want to know why?
Tell us why.
It's my work issued computer, and it's smaller than my MacBook Pro, and so it's easier to carry around.
Tell us.
I know I threw you with that, didn't I?
Well, I mean that's. Did they know that? Did people ask? I mean, do the people?
Yeah, some people know. Some fanboys are really pissed off about that.
As 8 people walk out. We want refunds. So tell us a little bit. Let's talk about the internal secrecy of Apple. I thought one really interesting comment I thought that I had never heard before was how some of the meetings began with, if with the employees, if you say anything about what we're about to talk about, you will be fired and you will be prosecuted.
You're referring to the new employee orientation security briefing that happens for all new employees every Monday on the Apple campus. And the security secrecy is an important part of the Apple culture. It's an important part of the way of doing things at Apple. And so, it's not left to the new employee's imagination what the repercussions will be for divulging secrets. And Apple people are really good at it. They don't just sort of keep things close to the vest. They totally keep things close to the vest, to the point where they're hesitant to talk to their...
It's obnoxious to talk to them to that point.
Yeah, it's right. And I've written about this, and I analyze it in as non-judgmental a way as I can. I don't disagree with you that it's obnoxious, but I respect them for it. Like, if I'm not going to talk about my work, then I'm not going to talk about my work. That's the Apple mindset.
Right. That line, and we got a couple of Apple guys in here. Do you remember that line from the orientation? Was that when you do? Raising your hands? Yeah, you remember it. Okay.
Can't talk about it. Somebody
can't talk about it. I will not talk about that. You don't work at Apple anymore, Alex or Spencer. But how is it successful at Apple? How does it seem to work? How do they get, what is the psychology of that? Is it, I don't want to say, is it indoctrination? I mean, is it fear? Is it what is it that drives people to keep that oath from their, new orientation meeting?
Well, I think it's all of those things in different measures at different times. So metaphorically speaking, it's not unfair to compare Apple to a military organization or to a religious institution. It has a hierarchy, it has rules, it has a very strong sense of mission, and it has a tremendous sense of accomplishment. So people dream about working at Apple, and once you're there, if you're successful, if you're not successful, you'll be gone pretty quickly. But once you're there, you sort of see the evidence of your success, and you see reasons for being proud of your accomplishments, and so you buy in, and it's voluntary, obviously, right? It's a free country. No one is forcing you to go to work there. So in other words,
it's almost like an honor to work there, right?
Very much so. So and look, the Apple people get the Apple PR apparatuses gets very upset with me. Not upset. They get annoyed when I liken the company to a terrorist organization or to a resistance cell. I didn't originate either one of those. But all of these things are metaphors. But if you think about them, the people in these secretive organizations believe. That's the initial premise. They believe. So you say, well, how is it successful? Well, because they are believers.
It works.
Yeah. If they weren't, if they saw this as a job, then it would be a lot harder.
With that, how in the we'll come back to that. Tell us about the top 100, and how did you tell us what it is, and then tell us how in the world you were able to how did you get that out? How did that just come out? How were you able to break that story, basically?
So, I try to make the top 100 as dramatic as possible because I think it is dramatic. Someone could say, look, dude, it's a corporate offsite, right? Okay, true. It's a high-level corporate offsite. But what it is when Steve Jobs was alive, he would select approximately the top 100 people in the company by his definition of the top 100 most important people, not according to their rank necessarily. And there would be hurt feelings if you were included.
It caused people to leave?
I'm sorry?
You talk about that it caused hurt feelings, but was it so bad that people would leave the
No,
company?
well, no, but it would, people in corporations get upset about being included in something, not being included in something, getting an assignment, not getting an assignment.
Sure.
He knew and he wanted you to be upset if you were at this year's top 100 and not next year's top 100. There was a reason why Steve excluded you, and that's not good. But generally, this is very high level. It would be, they would go to one of a couple of resorts in the Carmel or Monterey Bay area, and they would have presentations by Steve Jobs and other Apple executives and a few outsiders over the years about what was coming down the pike at Apple. Now, this was important because for such a secretive company, generally very few people would know about all of the products that were coming down the pike. The Top 100 meeting would be an opportunity for the executive management team to show a larger group of still very senior people things like the iPod for the first time, the iPhone for the first time, and so on. And it was an opportunity for people who didn't ordinarily work with each other to meet each other. The secrecy was extreme. Steve wanted people to take buses down from Cupertino, not to drive themselves. He didn't want people putting it on their calendar. He didn't want people doing email or making phone calls from the event, which of course they did because they're very busy Apple executives. They're gonna do that. They swept the room for bugs to make sure that the competition wasn't spying, and
like
they would
with like a security force
Yes.
would come in and sweep the
Yes.
dogs and stuff.
I don't know about dogs, but whatever the state of the
Would
art
have been a
is,
better sweep with
if-
dogs.
If dogs are state of the art, then they would have used it. And I do know that at the last
Some
Top
dogs.
100 that Steve Jobs was alive for, he prohibited conversations to go on while food servers were in the room, because those food servers, could be a Samsung executive in a, in a server's uniform. I found out about it the same way I found out about everything else in the book, by interviewing people and talking about it. I'm sure the first time somebody mentioned it to me, they assumed that it wasn't particularly interesting, or they assumed that it was known.
Yeah.
But I knew it wasn't. And once I had that kernel of information, I was able to ask other people, hey, what's this Top 100 thing? And they say, oh, that's blah, 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 that like that.
Yeah, I mean, it seems it's so interesting. It's so typical of Apple, it seems, but it's brilliant because, I mean, these top 100 people are the most probably sought after employees in the whole company, right? And these are the rock stars, rock stars, and I'm sure, and please tell us, bringing these guys in only deepened, that loyalty. Him showing them the iPod before everyone else, or showing them the iPad or whatever he showed them. I mean, that had to create just so much more loyalty amongst those top tier AAA guys.
Yeah, I think, one comment I got, if you were in the audience, you considered it a privilege. If you were asked to present, you considered it terrifying, because the presentations had to be the same quality as what Steve Jobs would do for a public keynote. So, but yeah, I think, people had a metaphorical gold star or gold leaf on their lapel for attending a Top 100.
You talk about a lot about the culture in the book, and we've talked a little bit about it tonight. One thing that I thought was fascinating was how you talked about how work at Apple is basically life, right? When you come back from the weekend, it seems there's no standing around the water cooler and talking about what you did. It's very much business all the time, every time.
Right. And these are some of these are anecdotes, and they become generalizations that, by and large, when I talk to Apple people, nobody challenges me on. And so the high level takeaway is that Apple, unlike certain other companies, doesn't approach work to be a subject of play. They don't feel that they need to entertain their employees. They think work is serious stuff. That doesn't mean that it needs to be drudgery. That doesn't mean that it needs to be painful. But it's not to be confused with your social life.
Yeah.
You're here to accomplish something very important, and we don't have a lot of time. So let's not waste it talking about things that aren't germane.
Yeah. Well, talk to us a little bit about. We'll talk about focus. Especially as it relates, startups. This is one of my, my favorite takeaways from Steve Jobs as a founder, is just the incredible focus that he had, and he, really directed the company with. We this afternoon I was talking to Francisco, who's our community manager, and he said, I vividly remember the experience of opening my first iPod, and that's had just an incredible impression on him. The packaging, how he felt,
Yeah.
how it looked. Where did that focus in design come from at Apple? Was it there at the beginning? Did it come when Steve came back?
So I'm purposely not an expert on the pre-1997 era. I cover it a little bit in the book, but I decided if I was going to write about how Apple works, that I was going to focus professionally on the 1997 forward period. So I don't know where the focus came from. From my reading, there was certainly this attention to detail and attention to design almost from the very, very beginning, from the Apple II, and certainly with the first Macintosh. And David Kelly at IDEO tells the story about getting a call at 3 a.m. from Steve wanting to argue about the composition of the screws on the inside of the original Macintosh. And this has become a metaphor for his obsession with things that not only the things that you could see, but the things that you couldn't see. And I write in the book about the attention that Apple gives to packaging design, which like most people think, oh well, that's like number 17 on the list of important things to deal with, and they take it very seriously because we all remember opening the box and seeing the device placed beautifully inside, and so on. So this notion of focus and simplicity is what's so fascinating to me about Apple, is that it's not any one thing. It's not just some focus on the features in a product. It's focus on, well, we're not going to get into too many products. We're not going to get into too many verticals. We're not going to get into it's really interesting to me. I don't think has been discussed enough that Apple, this giant company, is extremely headquarters centric around Cupertino. They don't have regional offices. Yes, they have retail stores. Yes, they have these factory relationships in China, but the important meetings take place
Decisions are
in
made here.
Cupertino, face to face. The same way that I read a physical newspaper in the morning, Apple people talk to each other to do the important work of Apple. It's not to say that it doesn't happen, but it's not a video conferencing culture. It's not a teleconference culture, and so on. It's not a it's not a virtual commuting culture either.
Would you tell the story about Yahoo, about his?
Sure.
It was a really, really interesting story.
Sure, and this story in my book had been told before, to be clear, but you have to help me. It was 2007, I think, right? The year that Jerry Yang became interim CEO of Yahoo again, or maybe I think he was interim first, and then he became permanent for a while. And he invited Steve Jobs to speak to a group of 150 or so top Yahoo executives, and they were having an offsite at the Sofitel in Redwood Shores, and essentially they got the question. They asked Steve Jobs the question that Yahoo was asking everybody and still is, which is, what should we do? And he said, I can't tell you what to do, but I can tell you how we thought about what we did when I came back to the company in 1997. And putting it simply, we asked, what are we good at? And I knew the answer. We were good at making Macintosh computers. So we stopped doing all the other stuff. Did you know that Apple made a digital camera in 1997? Can't remember what it was called, but they were selling a digital camera, and they were also selling printers and the Newton and many different SKUs of computers. And Jobs said, we're going to make 2 desktops and 2 laptops for the time being. This was before the iMac. And actually, the way I tell the story, he did say to the Yahoo people, I know what I would choose, but I'm not going to tell you. That's your problem. And I think he didn't tell him for a reason, because he was teaching a lesson about his approach to running a company, his approach to entrepreneurialism, which was, and it's cliche, except they did it at Apple, which is know what you're good at, do that, focus obsessively on it, and work really hard to not do all that other crap that you're not good at. And by the way, work really hard not to do even things you are good at the expense of the things that are the most important things.
Do you think that ability and a lot of that came from, or the result of that was a lot of no's, right? I mean, he was saying no to a lot of things. He was cutting things. Do you feel like that culture of saying no and the ability to focus Was it the majority of it driven by Steve, or has that permeated through the rest of the executives in the company?
Well, those are two questions, and I think the answer to both is yes. This did come from Steve, as far as I can tell. This was his concept, and he inculcated that into the culture of Apple. So Tim Cook references this every public speech that he makes, that we're going to continue to say no to things that we don't have the time or the ability or whatever or what have you to do. So yeah, I think it is part of the Apple culture. That doesn't mean they're going to be able to execute it without him, but I think they'll continue to try to think that way.
Tell us about, this is a great line in the book where you talk about Apple employees, that they almost act like wealthy teenagers of wealthy people.
So you're referring to a part where I described the ways that Apple, despite its size and success, is able to emulate a startup selectively. So it will create a physical area where a special project is going on, and work in sort of ways like, physically and emotionally to separate the people working on that project from the rest of the company. Now, again, not a new concept in Silicon Valley. There were Skunk Works and other names for this type of thing, but the metaphor that I'm using is it's a young product. It's not necessarily young people, but it's young in the sense that it's immature, it's nascent. And I said these are like rich kids because they don't have the baggage of life and of a larger organization, but they do have access to the resources of very rich parents. In this case, Apple's $110 billion balance sheet.
What startups that you see right now sort of emulate Apple's culture and what Apple did? Are there any?
Well, rather than, I'm often really deficient in my knowledge of Silicon Valley startups because I don't have the time to pay attention to many of them. And I think to be an expert on startups, you have to at least approach having an encyclopedic knowledge of what's going on the way a venture capitalist would, for example. So, but I'll tell you about some that I've written about. Because there's some that are being obvious about it. So two that come to mind are, one is Square, which has hired a lot of Apple people. Jack Dorsey didn't work at Square, but he's made no...
at Apple.
He didn't. Thank you. He didn't work at Apple, but he's made no secret of the fact that he emulates and revered Steve Jobs, and so he's doing two jobs, and he's
doing keynotes.
He's doing keynotes, and the design of the device is overtly Apple-like. So that's one example. My favorite example, and it's a different story. It's a controversial topic, which is people have asked the question: well, why are there so few former Apple executives out there in the world running companies? And I've got a bunch of reasons why. We can talk about it if you like. One that is happening is Nest, which is run by Tony Fadell, who was a senior Apple executive, and the Nest device, the smart thermostat, if you haven't seen it, looks like it could easily fit in an Apple store. I have a little section on Nest and Tony in the book, and Tony was really interesting. He shared with me his thinking at this stage of his company's career life, which is I think 2 years old, what he's trying to take from Apple and what he isn't. What he's trying to take is this design aesthetic, this focus on the customer, this willingness to spend money on things that are really important to serve the product, to serve the customer. What he's not taking, he makes a very good observation that's important to this group of people who think that they have to have Apple's success, they have to be just like Steve. So Apple's very difficult with the press. They don't speak freely. That wasn't always the case. Years ago, Steve did speak very freely and sought a lot of publicity.
Sought after covers, right?
Yeah. And so Tony's out there talking to the press, telling Nest's story, and he's also humbler with their channel partners, Best Buy, for example. He doesn't come right out and say this, but he basically implies, we don't tell Best Buy what to do the way Apple does, because we're a lot younger and humbler. And his line is he likens his company to where Apple was with the iPod in 2001, 2002.
Looking a little bit at the psychology of Steve Jobs, and as
this is your shout out to the Psychology Club members.
This is the Psychology Club right here. And a big thanks to Jenny, who we're going to bring up at the end, who really spearheaded getting Adam here. But what talk a little bit about this idea when sometimes when the employees would meet with Steve, he's legendary for just berating people and just kind of ripping into them for the sake of he kind of puts it for the sake of the product. And did that? I can read your exact line here that you said. There's a mentality that it's okay to shred somebody in the spirit of making the best products. And how do you think? Do you think did this affect job performance? Was the effect completely positive? And I'd say post 1997. We don't need to go into the past, but post 1997 was that in the end a positive thing for the company?
Well, so first of all, the passage you read wasn't about jobs. It's about the corporate culture. It's about the behavior generally, not specifically. And was it successful? I think there's plenty of there's only evidence to suggest that it has been successful. So the question in a variety of measures, whether it's market capitalization, profits, number of units sold, leadership in markets, it's been almost completely successful. So the questions become: is it sustainable? Did they succeed because of this behavior or in spite of this behavior? Because perfectly reasonable people will find this type of behavior repugnant.
Sure.
Someone said to me, I have a 5-year-old daughter, and someone said to me, how would you feel if when she grows up she went to work at Apple? And people assume I'm going to say, oh God, that I wouldn't want that. And I don't think anything of the sort. If it was her dream to work in that environment, to create those types of things, I'd say, I'm so proud of you. And so I think we all make trade-offs in our careers and our lives. And if Apple people view it as a trade-off, that you're going to be on the receiving end of a really unpleasant conversation for a variety of reasons, and the flip side of that is I'm going to contribute to greatness, then I'm not judging that decision on their part. But you raised something interesting. I mean, I'm told the conversations get nasty and they get personal and even petty, but the way the arguments are won is on what's best for the product, what's best for serving the customer. I believe, it sounds corny, I believe Apple really believes that. Mm-hmm. And now, I don't believe that you have to be a jerk to accomplish that. So, as I mentioned, I run a conference. A conference involves making a lot of decisions about what's going to go in what slot, who's going to go on stage, who's going to get to moderate it, and we disagree all the time, and we bend over backwards to disagree amicably and respectfully. I think we're really successful at it.
Well, so like you say, it was successful from a market cap perspective. It was successful from a product perspective. What about from a people perspective? You spoke with these people. They gave you, you had all these sources telling you the truth. Did it affect these people in negative ways? Did it affect them in positive? It affected their work in positive ways, but sure. Personally,
well, there's a few issues here. And I don't write this in the book, but anecdotally, you hear about Apple people being under just a severe amount of stress, and in some cases, debilitating amount of stress. And these are generalizations, and so they don't apply everywhere, and it varies by job function and by level. But these are anecdotes, and it's not the only company where people are under a ton of stress. But it is a place where you're expected to give your all. And again, that's cliche at a lot of places, but at Apple they mean it. They use it in a little handout that they give on this new employee orientation. They say something along the lines of you can expect to do your life's best work here, but you're going to be swimming in the deep end. This is a place where you're going to want to work weekends because it's that hard. You're going to be out of your comfort zone. So I think I veered away a little bit from your question. Does it affect people, right? Yeah, but then but they have incredible longevity too, and not just at the top, but at all levels of the organization. People tend to stick around for a really long time. I'll give you a slightly different observation that you didn't ask, but another fascinating characteristic of the psychological culture of Apple is that it is understood not only do you keep secrets, but that you're going to devote all your time and energy to Apple at work, to Apple.
Sure.
And that none of this brand of you bullshit that is so popular. It's the brand of Apple. Full stop. You don't like that? You don't have to work here. Now, it's obvious why that's good for shareholders and why that's good for customers, why it's good for the company. But I have heard people say, how having said that, I toiled for all these years and I came out and nobody knew who the hell I was.
Right.
I think on balance it's working out pretty well because I may not know who the hell you are, but I know you worked at Apple for 10 years and you couldn't be a moron if you worked at Apple for 10 years.
Or I know
That's
what
my
you worked
assumption.
on. I've used your work.
So again, trade-offs.
Okay. Tuck, tell us a little bit about just talking about the future of Apple, and you just heard Tim Cook speak, and you've just written about them recently. Tell us a little bit about his role going forward in terms of, is he there to stay? Is he, you talked about this where he's got a 10-year, stock vest.
Yeah.
Is the way things have gone the last 6 or 8 months, has it gone great? Has it gone as expected? What's your take?
So first of all, it's by any reasonable measure, it's too early to tell. And in the book, I say, Tim Cook may be a caretaker CEO of Apple, but it could be a very long caretaker period. Yeah. And I mean that. I think he's as far as I can tell, he's he may be the CEO that Apple needs right now. This is a big company with a lot of complex
That's a great point.
Operations and things going on, and he's somebody who's on top of that. Let me tell you about the exchange that I had with him at the All Things D conference last week. It was because it was fascinating and entertaining as well. I stepped up to the microphone and identified myself, and then I said, "It's nice to be able to ask you a question, Tim," because I hadn't had that opportunity yet. And I asked him what his strengths and weaknesses were as a CEO and as a person, and he declined to answer my question.
Wow.
At first he said, "Well, I think you could answer that question," and I basically, without saying, I sort of stepped back from the microphone, and my attitude was, "Well, I know I could answer that question. I have answered it, but I want you to answer it." So he didn't, and then there was this pause, and Walt Mossberg and Kara Swisher seemed content for the moment to let me continue to do the interview. So I continued, and I said, "All right. We know that Steve Jobs paid a lot of attention to design and marketing. Are you paying that kind of attention to design and marketing?" So I'm getting around to answering your question. And he gave me, if you look at his exact words, which I haven't gone back and done yet, he gave a sort of a thoughtful answer. He said, "Well, Steve spent considerably all of his time on those two areas, and I'm spending my time on all the areas that are of interest to the company." Now, that's exactly what those of us looking in from the outside expected. That's what we suspected, was that he was not going to have the same focus on design and marketing as Steve Jobs had. But he gave some color on that. So I have no evidence that he's not going to be the CEO for the foreseeable future.
When do you think Apple will have its first real post Steve Jobs test? At what point does the caretaking, is it to when they introduce a new product? Is it as the tablet market evolves? What do you think it is?
Well, yeah, we're going to need true insider knowledge to comment on. There's a very small handful of people will be able to say, well, this product Steve had no influence on. And you're going to have great insider knowledge to be able to speak authoritatively on that, because Apple plans really far ahead. They work on things for a long time. Some of those things never see the light of day. And so Steve Jobs would have been aware of things that were in the works for a very long time. Having said that, when Apple comes out with its first revolutionary product, its next revolutionary product, and I would say the last revolutionary product was the iPad, and the one before that was the iPhone. When they come out with their next revolutionary product, we'll be able to begin to judge the new regime. I don't think the same was true for the iPhone 4S or for the
sure.
or for the new iPad. The current iPad, I think we'll just start saying.
And do you believe that? I mean, do you believe that product line is that something that I mean, Steve may have, do you believe he had specific products in mind that that may go for the next 5 or 10 years or beyond? Or
Well, let me share like another. And this isn't in my book, but it's becoming clearer to me. The language at Apple is very important, and one of the words that Apple uses to describe itself is the Apple people talk about the cadence of Apple. Apple has a cadence to it. And so we see that cadence from the now predictable schedule of product announcements, right? So we'll see something next week at the Worldwide Developers Conference. We'll see something at an event, at a music event in September, or a Mac event in October, and there was an iPad event in March. And they mix it up a little, but they sort of that's the template. But behind the scenes, there's a cadence going on where they are working on things with a very detailed plan, a written down plan, and they know what the plan is. And that's not to say that they don't deviate from the plan, they do. But sure, and Steve Jobs intimated to Walter Isaacson that we've got this TV thing figured, and so everybody thinks they know what that means, but they don't know what that means. It could mean several things. And that's where, so to an extent, yes, he would have been knowledgeable about many of the things that are coming. But the other thing is that he was famous for changing what was coming based on what he saw. He would say, okay, we're not going to do that, or we are going to do this. Well, if they continue to operate that way, then the current management team will make changes that he wouldn't have foreseen.
Do you, and this is the last question, we'll open it up to everyone else. In the this time that Steve has left, have you seen any of the from the internal people? Is there any is this magic that Apple has had 6 or 8 months ago? Is it just as strong? Is there any evidence that it's less strong, or that
I don't have any.
Has the fairy dust left?
Yeah, I don't have. I don't personally have any evidence one way or the other, and but other some people do, right? Some people have opinions, and in my experience, you have to take those opinions with a grain of salt. Some of them may be very good observations, some of them may be garbage observations, because this company is under so much scrutiny that I'm struggling for metaphors, but people. It's like they're like a painting that's a masterpiece, and people are analyzing every little brush stroke. Is there a fleck of dust under that brush stroke where the artist didn't smooth it out properly? That's the level of scrutiny, and some of it's important and some of it isn't. Yeah. So for example, I'll give you like a superficial example that people are talking about very seriously. Was it a good idea or a bad idea to go the direction of marketing the iPad more like the iMac? They don't have the iMac 4, the iMac 5, the iMac 7. They have the iMac. And when they come out with a new iMac, it's the iMac. But that isn't the naming scheme that they take for the iPhone. Was it the right move or the wrong move to call it the iPad instead of the iPad 3? Well, we know when Steve was alive, they called the second generation the iPad 2. It's this sort of thing that the people who care, and it's a lot of people, debate ad nauseum. Is it an important debate? I don't know.
You don't have an opinion on it?
I don't yet, and so was Tim Cook less charismatic and entertaining and brilliant on stage than Steve Jobs? Yes. Does that mean there's less magic? Maybe. I'm not sure.
Can we give Adam a big, huge round of applause?
Thank
you. Let's take a few questions from the audience, and I'll just walk out here, and why don't you meet me in the middle if you want to come, and we'll get you on tape here properly. So I will back up from the speaker.
HP. Did I say Latitude? Yeah, I meant HP. I can't remember what. It's an HP. Yeah. Perfectly good device, by the way, and light. Good battery power.
I thought your book did an excellent job of showing that Steve Jobs' greatest creation was his company, and then you study the company rather than Steve Jobs.
Yes.
So I don't think anyone else really has that insight. Like everybody's looking to Steve Jobs, the man. And your book actually talks about the company
Yes,
as
very
the
purposely.
best mirror of understanding him. And that's a great insight. But what I was going to ask is specific to like how Jobs is using Joel Podolny to try and perpetuate the legacy. Have you seen any of the materials that, I mean, he also picked Walter Isaacson as his biographer, so he totally blew that one. And the way that Inside Apple documents things seems more insightful than what they could actually tell themselves inside the university.
Interesting, yeah. So I mean, I thank you for your compliments, and I agree with a lot of what you said, and disagree with some of what you said. You're right. I very consciously made the book about Apple, not about Steve Jobs. And I mean, part of that, let's be honest, he was working with a world famous historian, and I knew there was going to be a very comprehensive biography about him, which I think Walter Isaacson achieved, a very comprehensive biography. So, and that wasn't my topic. My topic was the company. So I tried very hard to make it about the company, which also served to answer this perennial question: what's the difference between Steve Jobs and Apple? I tried to answer that question. I think there is a difference. That's not to deny his centrality to the company over the last 14 and a half years, but to say that there is this thing that resulted from his hard work, but also the hard work of many other talented people called Apple. You asked me about Apple University, which is something that Steve Jobs created about 4 years ago, and hired the dean of the Yale School of Management and to teach case studies about Apple's decisions and Apple's decision-making processes to Apple's employees, particularly its managers. And it was obvious to me that this was an effort on Steve Jobs' part to write down his techniques, so that, almost in a Talmudic sense, so that his followers would be able to understand his techniques when he was gone, and he knew at that point that he was going to be gone. I don't know nearly as much about Apple University as I would like to know. There are documents. I haven't read them, and I don't know that those documents. I believe those documents are superior to my book. I think they have done a good job of explaining Apple to themselves. And I'd love to read them, and I think we all should get it. I wish we would all get a chance to read them. I started to say I think we should. I don't believe that. That's up to them. They do whatever they damn well please with the course material of Apple University.
So my question for you is, the thing that I love about Apple and that I've always been a fan of is almost, for lack of a better term, Steve Jobs just had balls when it came to setting pace for products, and like what he did with Adobe. I love it, absolutely love Adobe in general, but I hated Flash. So as a web designer, I thought it was clunky, I thought it was heavy. And then when he came out and just basically stood his ground against such a huge technology that was permeating the web, and it was kind of polluting the web with all these animation, and he took this stand, and now you go to HTML5 and CSS3, and that's their whole push, right? So I love that about Steve Jobs, and I love that about Apple, and I see so many companies at the startup level, the product is great, but as they get higher, it becomes a sellout, and the consumer ends up paying for it, right?
Yeah.
So you get these
Absolutely.
crap products because so-and-so company made a deal with so-and-so company and whatever. So my question for you is, do you see that change? Because like as a consumer, I'd be like super bummed if that changed at Apple.
I understand.
You know what I mean?
I do.
Do you see that happening? Do you see that changing, A, and then B, do you see other companies taking that same kind of stance?
Great, fantastic question, and you've given me an idea of it. I should have had a chapter. Maybe I can write a whole book on the question of ballsiness, because I think you put your finger on it, and so you've also given me an opening, because Derek didn't say this. At least I didn't hear him say it. But if people trickle out because maybe they have to go home to their families or something, I know there's going to be a raffle of a very small number of books. But I also wanted to tell you that someone's here to sell you a copy of my book if you want to buy it. And I just didn't want that to go unsaid, because I'll go ahead and be ballsy too, because I'm very proud of my product. Thank you.
Oh, I was gonna say it.
Okay, so let me try to you're gonna have to remind me 1 and 2, but I'll get there in a second, because I think Apple's ballsiness is one of the great parts of the story, right? They do very few things. That's part of the corporate culture. They've made tremendously big ballsy bets over the years. Now you could say with $110 billion and with the annuity stream of the Macintosh that they can take big bets and it doesn't matter anymore. Even if they fail, they'll be fine. But there was a period with the kind of money that they spent to develop the iPhone, for example, where an iPhone failure would have been devastating. Wouldn't have put them out of business, but it would have been really bad. And you can say that about a lot of the major investments that Apple has made. I find that tremendously exciting and tremendously what's the word I'm looking for? Attractive, right? So it's the antithesis of the way the rest of corporate America behaves. I don't know about startups, but the rest of corporate America says we have a fiduciary responsibility to our shareholders to be freaking boring. And we have to spread the risk around with a portfolio of lots of products that we hope won't fail, but we're pretty sure some of them will, because, shit happens and products fail, so we better have enough. And we don't want to try to lose money. And what happens? Most of them suck. And Apple doesn't suck. Now they could. And maybe they'll screw the next rev up, and I think they'll fail. They could fail as a result if they do. If they had failed over the last 15 years, they would have failed going down with the guns a-blazing. Now, to get to your question is will that change? I have a story in the current issue of Fortune where I suggest at the margin things already are changing. And at the margin, I want to stress that. I'm not suggesting the magic's gone, but they do have a responsibility. They are big. They are more complex than ever. They do have a responsibility to make sure that they don't screw things up as best they can, and that is their great challenge. To not screw it up, but to be true to themselves, which is to continue to make big bets, because that's what led to their success. Did I answer both your questions?
Well, yeah, exactly. I was just saying, is there any other companies you see having that kind of same?
Yeah, no, I mean, well, the question is there other companies that walk the walk as well as they talk the talk about serving the customer as Apple does? And look, I know that the fanboys and fangirls love to pick on we'll give you the examples of how Apple doesn't serve their customer, and I know about things that aren't as good as they should be, and we could all have a long conversation over beers about them. On balance, I think that Apple really does believe that it's serving its customer and it does make decisions. You don't want to get carried away. I mean, some of the things that Steve did, he did for self-serving reasons or out of spite or whatever, but again, on balance. So do other companies do it? I mean, sure, there's other good companies, but nothing comes to mind because I haven't been spending time. Two companies that I pick on from time to time, and a little bit in the book, and it's just sort of brain dead obvious how they could benefit from being more like Apple. One is Google, which has so much going on, and they've acknowledged this, and they're trying to be more focused. And the other, really obvious one is HP, which is really suffering right now, I think, from being neither a great consumer nor a great enterprise company. And, did Apple get lucky by focusing on the consumer for the past 15 years, or did they create their great fortune by focusing on the consumer for the last 15 years? Yeah, doesn't matter. But the reason they're a $600 billion market cap company or whatever it is today is because of that focus.
Okay, we'll do one more.
So Steve had this habit of saying no at the last moment or saying things aren't good enough, and the entire organization complied. Who in Apple has that kind of power today?
I mean, the short answer to your question is I don't know, and this is what I was trying to get at with Cook. I mean, this is what we all want to know. So you have to presume, without any other knowledge, that Cook has that power. And so the question becomes, how will he exercise that power? If he's not this freakish genius that Steve Jobs was, By the way, I don't know if you noticed, but I try not to call him Steve because he wasn't a friend of mine, and I don't want to buy into the Apple behavior of referring to him as Steve because I'm not one of them. But I think it's safe to assume that Cook is not that same freakish genius, and so I assume he thinks of himself more the way a traditional CEO thinks of him or herself, which is, I'm the boss. I've got amazing people around me. I'm going to listen to what they have to say, and I'm going to make the decision. That's what Steve Jobs did too, by the way. And he wouldn't always acknowledge it, but he absolutely deferred to the people who knew more about things than he did. He would then act as if he knew what they knew, but that was his process as well in terms of decision making. There's anecdotal evidence that decisions are getting made more slowly at Apple, and I don't know if that anecdotal evidence is a fair generalization or if it's marginal.
Okay, let's give Adam another big, huge round of applause.